I think it's still morning. Good morning. My name is Bernard Kissui, and I'm from the Center for Wildlife Management Studies. I also work with the Tarangire Lion Project. Now, maybe a little bit about the Center for Wildlife Management Studies. It's under the School for Field Studies, which is a US-based organization. We are a study abroad program. I started working with the SFS almost 6.
Everyone's freezing.
Okay. So I started working with the School for Field Studies about 6 years ago, and we are running an environmental-based study abroad program for mostly US students in the Tarangire Manyara ecosystem. Now, I work there as the center director, and we operate within northern Tanzania, mostly in various national parks, community areas and stuff. So that's one of the things I do. For today, of course, I'm not just talk about the SFS and the program that I'm supporting, but more about the Tarangire Lion Project. The Tarangire Lion Project started, I think, in the late 90s, 1998, doing mostly lion studies within the Tarangire National Park and the surrounding areas. The long-term conservation efforts for lions and maybe other carnivores, we need to have information on 3 aspects. One, the population, to understand the population and the long-term trends, and then also to understand the current and the potential threats for the populations, and both ecological as well as human-related threats. And then we need to know the strategies for this threat reduction. And I think so far we have seen a lot of efforts going on in terms of conflict mitigation, which is threat reduction, and also some aspects of understanding the population of the wildlife. Our lion research in this area, Tarangire Manyara ecosystem, has got 2 components. The first one is the ecological part, and also the human dimension side of the activities that we are doing. I started working on the Tarangire Lion Project in 2003. Interest was to understand the movement of lions and also understand the status of the lion population in the area, initiate the demography and the long-term monitoring of the population, and also identify the conflict-prone areas in the area. We also initiated a survey to understand human-lion conflict in Tarangire Manyara ecosystem, which we were mostly interested in understanding the extent and the impact of the conflict. And then following that understanding, we started engaging in a conflict mitigation. So I always say, I think for long-term and sustainable conservation successes for large carnivores, we need to have information on both sides in order to develop effective conservation and management strategies for carnivores. Now, the Maasai step, where we work. So how does this work here? Okay, here. Okay. So our core lion study area is within This is Tarangire National Park. There's a small adjacent national park. It's called the Manyara National Park. As you all know, lions, they are spending a lot of time in the core areas, which is Tarangire, and also now we have a good number of understanding of lions in Manyara National Park. We are monitoring lions within the Tarangire National Park, which is about 2,000 square kilometer area. We have now initiated very detailed monitoring of lions within Manyara National Park, and also outside the areas, adjacent to the park, to the west and also to the east. Since we started the monitoring in 2003, the detailed monitoring, our current estimate is around 160 to 180 lions in this area. So these are individuals roaming around from the core protected area outside. Tarangire Manyara ecosystem, I think, is one of the very, very dynamic ecosystems, very, very migratory. So this map here is showing you the movement of the wildlife from the core protected areas into the community area outside the protected areas. So there's a huge amount of movement which results into a lot of conflict between the people and the large carnivores. Now, our interest has been to understand not only the movement, but also the conflict, the pattern, and the nature of the conflict, and then engage into the conflict mitigation activities. Now, how do we do this monitoring? We are using radio telemetry as the standard technique for lion monitoring. So we have right now about 10 prides fitted with VHF as well as GPS collars. Now this is helping us, first of all, to get very detailed information about the population itself. So with the collars, we are able to follow these animals as they move across from the core protected areas into the human areas. Now that is very, very useful because it does help us to know how do they use these two areas that are protected and the community areas. We do both, of course, on the ground tracking of lions from the protected area into the community area, but also sometimes, of course, we do aerial tracking of the lions. And then we combine that with individual identification. Now, as you know, there are, of course, so many techniques that we can use to study carnivores. This is one of them. And using individual identification provides you with probably the best accurate information about the population numbers. We have so many other techniques. We can estimate how many lions, how many other carnivores we have in an area, but individual identification provides you probably the best estimates. It has its own advantages and disadvantages. Number one disadvantage, individual identification, you can only probably manage to do a very good study in a small area. We are covering around 2,000 square kilometers, so even though it is small, but I think we're still getting very good understanding of this particular population. The other advantage of using the individual identification is that you can actually get very detailed what we call demographic information of the population. Now I understand right now people are less interested in the classical ecological in behavioral studies, but I think they are very, very critical in informing conservation efforts, because you get information about so many aspects of your population. We can easily measure things like demographic rates within the population. Now, individual identification, I don't want to go into the details though. We use this whisker spots in order to identify each individual within our population. Now, this provides you with an opportunity to build what we call a life history of your population. With a life history information of your population, you are able to get information, of course, on demography and life history. So we can estimate, for example, birth rates, recruitment rate of the population. We can also estimate death rate of the different ages within the population. So what we call age, sex, recruitment rate or death rates can be easily obtained from the long-term population monitoring. You can also measure the impact of conflicts. For example, if you know properly the individuals within your population, you are better able to measure and monitor the impact of things like human cannibal conflicts. I think there have been 2 or 3 examples here of projects that are using this kind of information in order to successfully measure the impact of the conflict. And then with the long-term information, you are also able to measure impact of diseases. So as we talk about how conflict can affect and impact kind of populations, there's actually a huge impact to populations due to disease as well. And the disease outbreaks are most of the time linked to various ecological changes, such as climate change, and also various causes. We have a very good example of the diseases that broke in Serengeti and killed almost 30% of the lions in Serengeti. I worked in Ngorongoro, and one of the issues that we've been dealing with has been the impact of diseases within the Ngorongoro population. So we need to be able to monitor and detect impact of diseases, as of course we think about how do we improve carnivore conservation efforts. With long-term population monitoring, you can also understand the spatial patterns. So this can be spatial patterns in a conflict, spatial patterns in a movement of the animals, spatial patterns in other drivers of conflict or that affect populations. So we need to really work hard to get this information in the long term so that we are able to understand the dynamics towards conflict, towards conservation. And then most importantly, the long-term monitoring allows us to do evaluation and the effectiveness of the conservation successes that we have. Without this kind of monitoring and very detailed data, sometimes it's difficult to assess and also measure the effectiveness of our conservation actions. So our project has been engaged in trying to collect the necessary information to be able to really measure conservation success of any conservation action within the landscape. Now, to give you some of the examples of the data that we have been obtaining, So this is an example of the, This is an example of the data on the temporal pattern of lion movement, that we have collected over the years. These are examples of the home range and the movement pattern of 5 prides from Tarangire National Park into the community areas. So this is based on the GPS data. Now you can see this is data during the dry season. This is data in the wet season. Let's take an example of one extreme movement pattern of this pride here. So you see in the wet season, the wet season here, they move far extensively into the community area and spend 5 to 6 months interacting with people outside there. I think another very good example is this other pride in northern Tarangire. You see how extensive their movement is into the community area in the wet season. Here is their movement in the dry season. So the home range contracts and expands on a seasonal basis. Now, this is very, very useful information because it tells us how do we need to strategize when it comes to how do we move into the community area and implement the conflict mitigation. Along with that, this is data from surveys that were conducted in the community areas to assess the temporal pattern of livestock depredation by the major carnivores. So let's take an example for lions. This is what we received from the community members. So this is the mean attack events, so how many attack events on livestock by lions in the wet season and in the dry season. So you can see there's a very strong correlation there of the pattern of livestock attack by lions to their temporal movement from the national park into the community area. So it's giving us information to say, so the movement of these animals across the park boundaries really correlates with the increase in the livestock predation in the community area. And that is also suggesting that the carnivores from the national park, which is the core protected area, are actually somehow involved in livestock predation in the community area. We see the same pattern for hyenas. For leopard, though, you can see there's no significant difference in the temporal pattern of livestock predation. Yeah. So that also tells you probably we don't have a very strong, temporal variation in the movement of leopard. They might be establishing more residence within the community area. And that is critical information as we think about our conflict mitigation strategies. There's a huge issue over the years that we have been working on, which is the retaliatory killing of lions, which is a very, very common phenomena, I think, across almost every landscape where human and the lions and other carnivores coexist. Spearing is one of the common approaches used in retaliation. But not only spearing, there has been issues of poisoning. We have recorded so many instances of livestock, lion poisoning as a result of conflict arising from livestock predation. This is just an example of one of the instances we recorded in 2009. Another example of lion poisoning as a result of livestock predation in one of the villages. That's another one, very recent, 2016. But we have been interested in understanding the spatial and the temporal pattern of livestock poisoning. So here, I just give an example of how widely spread. So this is Tarangire National Park, which is the core lion area. But you see, poisoning instances which result to lion poisoning and killing are happening all around the core protected area. So this is giving us really understanding of not only the pattern, but now how do we need to move strategically to deal with this kind of issues of lion poisoning. And the lion poisoning, as you all know, has got unintended consequences. Does not only kill the lions, but other carnivores as well. So we have actually a record showing in each of these instances, not only lions have been killed, but so many other carnivores, including vultures, birds. So it's a huge issue, and it needs strategic engagement. The other information that has come out from these studies have been to show how the conflict is mostly non-discriminatory. So it doesn't matter whether male lions, female lions are both killed due to conflict. Now, our surveys from 2004 to 2015 recorded about 276 lions killed in a conflict in 21 villages. And if you look at the age-sex impact of that conflict, you see, male lions, female lions, cubs, they are all vulnerable to the conflict. Which means, yeah, as much as we do our efforts towards conflict mitigation, I think it's important to understand the impact and the pattern of impact of the conflict in order for us to take into account these various aspects and the dimensions of the conflict. We have tried to measure this impact of conflict. Now, here is an example. From the data we collected 2004 and 12, we looked at the average monthly rate of conflict. And we found that in this ecosystem, 2.4 lions are killed per month. So that's a very, very high rate of conflict. And we think aggressive, of course, efforts needs to happen in order to reduce the level of conflict to the level where, I don't know, it can be manageable or sustainable. And if you equate that to the level of the population within the ecosystem, this amounts to almost averages 80%, 18% of the annual population. Now that's very, very high level of conflict in an ecosystem. I know the other ecosystem that there has been such high levels of conflict is in Zimbabwe. There's a study that published around, I think, 15%. So this is among the ecosystems where conflict contributes very, very high level of carnivore mortality. Now, this is only conflict, so there are other sources of mortality within the area. So if you factor that in, you can quickly imagine that this population needs a lot of intervention in order to make sure lions, will continue to exist in this ecosystem. The other aspect that we have looked at, livestock depredation, like I said, it correlates also carnivore killings. We have come to document that retaliatory lion killing highly correlates livestock depredation events. And this has been one, I think, of the key reasons why we think we are implementing all these measures to reduce livestock attacks. The reason is actually here. We know that if you can reduce the attacks on livestock, you also reduce the number of lions that are killed. So we have seen here so many projects are now implementing what we call livestock security improvement. The reason is coming from this kind of data, which shows that livestock depredation by lions and the other carnivores as well actually contribute to lion killing in a big way. And here, if you compare that information for lions, hyenas, and leopard, you see that it is less so for hyenas and also leopard. So this means that in Maasai land, people are more successful in retaliating against lions than probably hyenas or leopard. In our data, there were some exceptions, like this outlier and this outlier. These were areas where we recorded a much higher number of hyenas killed. It was due to poisoning. So poisoning can be more effective against other carnivores, but lions are both vulnerable to poisoning as well as spearing. Yeah. So really, in our efforts towards improving coexistence between the people and the lions, yeah, we have the reason to monitor this kind of patterns, the correlation between events of livestock attacks and the number of lions that are killed. Now, more recently, I have been involved in understanding the mechanisms. We now know, of course, in terms of predation, is a very, very big factor for livestock killing, but there is still a lot of information we needed to know in order to improve our understanding and also our interventions. Now here we ask this question: what mechanisms drive carnivore predation of livestock at a finer scale and also at a much broader scale? Now we want to really understand and be able to identify areas across landscapes where livestock predation risks are much higher. Now, using information that we have on livestock predation, we are beginning to map. So this is an example of a study that we conducted. This is Manyara Ranch. It's a very small conservancy area. We used modeling and we used the data on livestock predation that have occurred in this area, and also the movement pattern of both lions, livestock, and the other wildlife, to try and predict areas within this ranch where livestock predation was the highest. So you can see here, for example, these areas with white, these are the areas that have been identified to have the highest risk of livestock depredation. Now, we want to have this kind of information across the entire landscape, which will be very, very useful in providing guidance of where our conflict mitigation interventions can be targeted. So this is the beginning in a small area, and we are engaging students. This is a master's student, and now we have a PhD student who is going to do a much broader landscape level analysis of the pattern, and also identify high areas for livestock predation risk. The other aspect is to understand the spatial pattern of carnivore depredation of livestock. And in this landscape modeling, we know that there are 5 components that are very, very critical in a carnivore predation on livestock. The carnivore population, so we need to have information about the carnivores, distribution, abundance, and the ecology. The livestock, we need to know the movement pattern of the livestock and how they use also the landscape and how the livestock interact with the carnivores. And then there's very good evidence about the influence of the wild prey. So we need to know how the abundance distribution and also movement pattern of the wild prey might be also contributing to increase in livestock predation risks. There are studies in the past that have suggested that the abundance and the movement pattern of natural prey could also drive livestock predation pattern. So in the Tarangire Manyara area, we want to establish and know the exact timing and also pattern and how the movement pattern of this might be influencing livestock depredation. And then habitat. We need to understand the role of habitat, connectivity, structure of the habitat, and also patchiness. Now this is also very, very critical, I think, player in understanding the spatial patterns in carnivore depredation of livestock. So we are working on that aspect as well. And then people. Yeah, there has been so much emphasis here how important it is to know and engage the communities in order to understand the spatial pattern and the carnivore predation livestock. Yeah, we believe that we need to integrate all these 5 aspects and come up with a spatial explicit model and to see how all of them are integrated and how they can be worked out in order to inform the pattern but also our conflict mitigation measures. So all of these, some of the very recent activities, and I'm working in a partnership with the Michigan State University and engaging the students in trying to undertake this part of the study. Lastly, from our long-term monitoring, which is based on individual identification, just to show you, since we started working on lions in this ecosystem, we are seeing, of course, a declining trend in the number of lions. Of course, there are no more up and down movements, but the overall trend for the past 15 years has been declining. Now, my own assessment is that probably conflict might be contributing, a lot to this pattern that we are seeing. Now, this is based on individuals that we know from the core study area here. So as we continue, of course, monitoring the number of lions in our study area, we will know whatever we are implementing in terms of conflict mitigation, if we are successful outside, we should see an increase or at least a stabilization in the population trend. Our project has also been engaged in conflict mitigation. Now, I don't have the time, of course, to go into the details, but just like other projects on large carnivore conservation, we have been doing predator-proof boma. We currently have some educational and awareness projects that we're implementing. So I don't think I have time to go into the details of those. But we are implementing some activities on the conflict mitigation as well. Now, I wanted to finish this by showing this graph here in order to, I think, leave you with this. Now, in the study that we did, 2004, 2008, something like that, we collected information about causes of livestock losses. Here, we are talking about predation, which is this one here. But we collected information and found, disease is a major cause of livestock losses in the Maasai and the pastoralist communities. Theft, probably not much now, but it's also a cause. But for me, I think I wanted to make you think about this comparison. Diseases are causing more than 10 times fold loss of livestock in these communities than predation. So are we probably, focusing too much on predation and we actually forgetting about these other things that are causing huge losses in livestock in these communities? So maybe we need to use this issue of livestock diseases as one of the, I'd say, what do you call, leverages to enhance or to buy, support towards, large carnivore conservation, because it's such a huge problem, and most of our projects are focused mostly in reducing predation, which of course contributes. But probably when people lose so much from disease, an additional loss due to predation just increases, the anger. So I think for me, this has been very, very important information that we need to think about. How can we also take advantage of this issue and make it part of our conservation efforts towards carnivore conservation? I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Questions?